Frost Hollow Ridge, Colorado, September 1887. The earth was still warm when they laid Caleb Ashford into it. Warm from a summer that had baked the high country clay until it cracked like old leather. Warm in a way that would not last, could not last. Because September in the Colorado mountains is a traitor. It gives you sun and blue skies, and the lie of endless days, all while winter sharpens its teeth just beyond the ridge. Lorelei Ashford stood at the edge of the grave and did not cry. She had cried herself empty 3 days prior when they brought what remained of her husband down from the rockslide on a mule-drawn sledge. She had cried when she washed the stone dust from his broken hands. She had cried when she tried to explain to an 8-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl that their father would not be coming home for supper ever again. But here now, with half the town of Frost Hollow Ridge watching her with eyes that were equal parts pity and judgment, she would not give them tears. She would give them stone. Thaddeus stood to her right, small hand gripping hers with a strength that seemed impossible for his size. 8 years old and already trying to be the man of the house. Already holding himself rigid the way he had seen his father stand. His other hand held tight to his little sister Marigold, 5 years old and still too young to understand that forever was a very long time. "Mama," Goldie whispered, using the name only she was allowed. "Is Papa cold down there?" Lorelei looked down at her daughter. Golden hair that caught the light like her namesake flower. Eyes the color of creek water in July. Caleb's eyes. "No, sweet girl," Lorelei said quietly. "The earth keeps him warm." It was not a lie. Not exactly. The earth did keep things. Heat. Memory. Secrets. Caleb had taught her that. Had spent 5 years of marriage teaching her to see the world not as surface and sky, but as layers and time and the slow, patient work of stone. The Reverend Amos Whitfield was speaking now. Words about dust and resurrection, and the sure and certain hope. Lorelei heard none of it. She was doing mathematics in her head. Grim, desperate mathematics. 3 mouths to feed. A cabin that was little more than optimistic lumber and failing ambition. $17.32 in a coffee tin under a loose floorboard. And winter coming with the inevitability of gravity. The crowd shifted. She felt their eyes, felt the weight of their pity pressing down like a physical thing. Widow Prudence Marlowe, old and bent and survivor of 2 husbands, nodded at her with something that might have been respect. The rest simply stared with the blank helplessness of people who had no idea what to say to a 28-year-old woman whose entire future had just been buried in hard clay. And then there was Silas Breckenridge. He stood at the back of the gathering, a full head taller than most men's shoulders, like roof beams. Hands that could span a 2x8 with room to spare. Master builder. Owner of Breckenridge Lumber and Craft Works. A man whose word on matters of wood and shelter was considered as close to gospel as you could get without actually being scripture. He was watching her. Not with pity, with assessment. The way a man might look at a building he was being asked to salvage. Calculating load-bearing walls and lost causes. Their eyes met across the grave. He nodded once. She did not nod back. The service ended. People shuffled forward to offer condolences that sounded like recipes they had all learned from the same cookbook. "So sorry for your loss. He was a good man. The children must be a comfort. If there's anything we can do. Lorelei accepted each one with a small smile that did not reach her eyes, and words that meant nothing. Thank you. Yes. Very kind. We'll manage. Lie upon lie. The crowd dispersed like smoke. Back to their lives. Back to problems that did not include figuring out how to keep 2 children alive through a Colorado winter with no husband, no money, and a cabin that would not hold heat any better than a sieve would hold water. She turned to leave Tad on one side, Goldie on the other, when Silas Breckenridge stepped into her path. Up close, he was even larger, not fat, just built on a scale that suggested God had been feeling generous with the raw materials. His face was weathered the way good wood weathered all character and grain. 50 years old, maybe. Or 45, lived hard. Mrs. Ashford, he said. His voice was low, respectful, but it carried the weight of authority. A voice accustomed to being listened to. I wonder if I might have a word. Lorelei looked up at him. Mr. Breckenridge? I knew your husband, Silas said. Not well, but I knew him. Good man. Brilliant, they say. All that geology business. He was, Lorelei said. Past tense like a knife. Silas glanced at the cabin visible in the distance, perched on the hillside like a drunk, leaning against a fence. That's your place, then. It was not a question, but Lorelei answered anyway. It is. Mind if I take a look? Professional courtesy. No charge. Every instinct Lorelei possessed screamed no. But she was also practical enough to know that professional advice, even unwanted, was better than ignorance, and it would cost her nothing but time. If you wish, she said. They walked in silence, the children trailing behind. Silas moved like a man inspecting a battlefield. His eyes catalogued every gap in the chinking, every sag in the roofline, every stone in the foundation that sat slightly wrong. By the time they reached the front door, his expression had settled into something that looked like grim confirmation of a diagnosis he had already made. He walked the perimeter, knocked on logs with his knuckles, listening to the sound they made, crouched to examine the foundation stones, stood back to assess the roof pitch. The whole inspection took less than 5 minutes. When he turned back to Lorelei, his face was kind. That was somehow worse than if it had been cruel. Mrs. Ashford, he said carefully, I'm going to be straight with you because I think you're the kind of woman who'd rather have truth than comfort. I am, Lorelei said. This cabin won't make it through winter. The words hung in the air like an execution sentence. The chinking is inadequate, Silas continued. It'll dry and crack and fall out by first hard freeze. The foundation stones are pulling heat straight down into the ground. And that roof. He shook his head. That roof is already bowing under its own weight. Add snow and you're looking at a collapse. Lorelei said nothing. She had known. Of course she had known. Caleb had known too. Had talked about fixing it, improving it, making it right. Next summer, he had always said. Next summer when the geology contracts came through. Next summer when there was time and money and daylight enough to do the work properly. Next summer had run out. I can help, Silas said. I've got an Iron King 500 potbelly stove, best on the market. Throws heat like a locomotive. I can let you have it at cost, install it myself. I've got seasoned lumber, good tight spruce. We can shore up that roof proper chinking, make this place tight enough to hold warmth. I can send a crew. He named a price. It was fair. More than fair. Probably half what he should be charging. It might as well have been $1 million. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Breckenridge, Lorelei said quietly, but I'm afraid I can't afford it. Credit, Silas said immediately. Pay me when you can. Spring, summer, whenever. No, Lorelei said. The word came out harder than she intended. But there it was, no. Because she had learned young that debt was a chain, and chains could strangle you just as sure as cold could freeze you. Silas blinked, surprised. Mrs. Ashford, I'm trying to help. I know, and I'm grateful. But no, something shifted in Silas's expression. Not anger, confusion. Here was a problem with a clear solution, and the person with the problem was refusing the solution. It did not compute in his world of measurements and right angles and proven methods. Ma'am, he said slowly, I don't think you understand. This is not a small thing. This is life and death. You and those children, you won't survive what's coming. Then I suppose we'll have to find another way, Lorelei said. She could see him trying to find the right words, the words that would make her see reason, see sense, see that he was right and she was wrong, and stubbornness was a luxury she could not afford. But before he could speak, Tad stepped forward. Small, skinny 8-year-old Thaddeus Ashford, with his father's serious eyes, and a spine made of something that would not bend. My papa left us things, the boy said. Plans. Mama will figure it out. Silas looked down at the child, then back up at Lorelei. Plans. My husband's journals, Lorelei said. He was very thorough. Geology journals, Silas said, and there was the faintest edge of something in his voice. Not quite condescension, but close. Mrs. Ashford, with all respect to your late husband's learning rocks and minerals don't keep a family warm. Lorelei felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. Pride, maybe. Or fury. Or the particular kind of steel that gets forged when the whole world tells you that you are too small, too weak, too foolish to survive. Thank you for your assessment, Mr. Breckenridge, she said. Her voice was ice-water calm. I'll keep your offer in mind. It was a dismissal. Polite, but absolute. Silas stood there for a long moment, clearly wrestling with whether to push harder. Finally, he nodded. Doors open if you change your mind. Before first snow would be best. He tipped his hat to her and walked away down the hill, shaking his head slightly. Lorelei watched him go and felt a small, savage satisfaction that she had refused him, that she had not bent, that she had not accepted the help that came wrapped in the assumption that she was helpless. But as she turned back to the cabin, to the sagging roof and the gaps in the walls, and the cold floor that would only get colder, the satisfaction drained away, replaced by something that tasted like ashes and fear. Because what if he was right? That night, after Tad and Goldie were asleep, curled together under every blanket Lorelei owned, she sat alone at the small table and tried to make numbers become hope. The fire in the miserable cast-iron stove Caleb had installed guttered low. She fed it one stick of wood. Just one. because the woodpile outside was not large and winter was still months away and mathematics did not lie. $17.32. Flour, cornmeal, salt pork, beans, potatoes if she was lucky. How long would $17 stretch? January, February. What happened in March when the money ran out and the snow was still 10 feet deep? And the nearest town with a general store was a day's hard travel. She could take in laundry, sewing, mending. But who in Frost Hollow Ridge had money for such things? Everyone here was scratching survival from the same hard soil. There was no surplus, no excess, no room for charity disguised as commerce. She could sell the cabin, take the children somewhere warmer, Denver maybe, find work there. But the cabin was worth nothing, less than nothing, a liability. And Denver was a city for people with skills and connections, and the kind of polish Lorelei had never possessed. She could remarry. There were men in the territory, lonely men, men who would take a woman with 2 children if she came with a strong back and a willingness to work, and an understanding that love was a luxury and survival was the goal. The thought made her stomach turn. No, there had to be another way. Her eyes fell on the stack of leather-bound journals in the corner. Caleb's life work, 7 volumes of careful script and precise diagrams, and the accumulated knowledge of a man who had loved rocks more than most men love God. She had never read them. Not really. She had looked at his drawings, had listened when he talked about heat flow and thermal conductivity in the ways that Earth held memory, but it had all been abstract, academic, the passion of a man who dealt in theories. Now, driven by a desperation that felt like drowning, she pulled the journals to the table, opened the first one, began to read. The early volumes were technical, geological surveys of mineral deposits, limestone formations, granite composition. She skimmed through them, understanding perhaps 1 word in 5, looking for anything that might be useful. The middle volumes were better. Here, Caleb had started to branch into thermodynamics, heat retention in various stone types, the insulating properties of Earth, underground temperature stability. She read slowly, sounding out words she did not know, sketching diagrams on scrap paper, trying to make sense of equations that looked like a foreign language. And then, tucked into the back pocket of the 7th journal, she found the map. It was hand-drawn on heavy paper, rendered with the meticulous detail of a man who measured the world in precise increments. Their small plot of land, the cabin marked in the center, the creek running along the western boundary, the stand of aspen to the north, and there behind the cabin, marked with a heavy X and labeled in Caleb's neat handwriting, Karst Formation, stable limestone, confirmed thermal stability. Below the map, a single sentence in German, the language of his mother. Die Erde vergisst die Sonne nicht. The earth does not forget the sun. Lorelei stared at the words. She spoke no German. But Caleb had said this to her once years ago when they were newly married, and he was trying to explain why he loved geology, why he spent hours staring at rocks and scribbling in notebooks while she wondered if she had married a madman. The earth remembers Lorelei, he had said, taking her hands in his dirt under his nails as always. All summer long the sun warms the ground. The heat soaks down deep into the stone. And in winter, when the sun hides and the world freezes, the earth gives that heat back. Slowly, faithfully. The earth does not forget the sun. She had kissed him and called him her strange, beautiful fool, and thought no more about it. Now, staring at the map at the X marking a spot she had barely noticed, she felt something stir in her chest. Not quite hope. Not yet. But perhaps the memory of what hope felt like. She looked up at the darkness beyond the window. September. That gave her maybe 6 weeks before the first real snow. 6 weeks to figure out what Caleb had been trying to tell her. 6 weeks to become whatever she needed to become to keep her children alive. The fire in the stove had died to embers. Lorelei did not add more wood. She sat in the cold and the dark and made a decision that would have seemed like madness to anyone who knew her. She would trust a dead man's cryptic German phrase and a hand-drawn map. She would trust that her husband, brilliant and impractical and gone, had left her something more valuable than $17.32. He had left her a chance. Morning came cold and clear. Lorelei woke before dawn, stiff from sleeping in the chair, the journal still open before her. Tad and Goldie were still asleep. She could hear their soft breathing from the small room beyond. She heated water on the dying stove, washed her face, braided her hair, put on her oldest dress, the one she wore for hard work, found the pickaxe and shovel Caleb had used for his geological surveys, took the map. The walk to the marked spot took 15 minutes. Up the hill behind the cabin, through scrub oak and juniper, over loose scree that slid underfoot. The morning light was thin and blue, making the landscape look like a sketch done in charcoal and ice. She found the place exactly where the map said it would be. A shadowed cleft in the hillside choked with thorn bush and fallen rock. Nothing about it looked promising. Nothing about it looked like salvation. But she had not come this far to turn back because of thorns. She set to work. The thorn bush fought her. Each branch seemed designed specifically to tear at hands and clothes. She hacked at it with the pickaxe, ripped at it with her hands, dragged it away in armfuls that left her palms bleeding and her forearms striped with scratches. Behind the thorns there were rocks, some small enough to lift, others that required the leverage of the pickaxe to pry loose. She worked without stopping, without thinking, in a kind of trance, where there was only the next stone, the next root, the next obstacle between her and whatever Caleb had found. An hour passed. Then 2. The sun climbed. Sweat soaked through her dress. Her hands were raw. Her back screamed. She did not stop. And then finally, she saw it. A dark opening. Not large. Barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. But there. Real. Exactly where the map said it would be. She dropped the pickaxe, knelt at the opening, felt cool air breathing out from the darkness, air that smelled of damp stone and earth and deep, secret places. Her hands were shaking as she lit the small lantern she had brought. The flame caught steadied. She held it toward the opening, peering into the dark. Inside was a cave, not a grand cavern, not a cathedral of stone, just a small, intimate space, perhaps 20 feet deep, a dozen feet wide, ceiling high enough to stand. The walls were limestone, pale and smooth, where water had worked them over centuries. The floor was relatively level, covered in a thin layer of dust and fallen rock. But it was the air that made Lorelei catch her breath. It was not cold, not with the biting, aggressive chill of the outside. It was neutral, steady, comfortable almost. She held perfectly still, just breathing, just feeling. The temperature was constant, unchanging, like the air in a root cellar, but warmer. 55 degrees maybe, 60. In October, that would feel cool. In January, when the world outside was 40 below zero, it would feel like spring. The earth does not forget the sun. Lorelei sat down on the cave floor, set the lantern beside her, and began to cry. But these were not the tears of grief she had cried over Caleb's body. These were different, harder, hotter. Tears of relief and rage, and the specific kind of anguish that comes from realizing that the man you loved, the man you buried, had tried to save you, even knowing he might not be there to see it. He had known. Somehow he had known this place existed, had mapped it, had written his cryptic note, had left her this gift wrapped in German and geology and faith, that she would be smart enough, brave enough, desperate enough to find it. "Damn you, Caleb," she whispered to the empty cave. "Damn you for leaving, and damn you for being right." She sat there until the crying stopped, until she could breathe normally, until the mathematics in her head shifted, recalculated, allowed for this new variable. A cave, constant temperature, space enough for a family, protection from wind and snow and the killing cold. And if she could figure out how to heat it, how to make it not just shelter but home, then maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. She picked up the lantern and began to explore. The next 3 days, Lorelei divided her time between caring for Tad and Goldie and studying every word Caleb had written about thermal mass heat retention and underground structures. She read by dim lamplight until her eyes ached, made notes, drew diagrams, tried to translate her husband's academic theories into something she could build with her own 2 hands. The children sensed something had changed. Tad especially. He was old enough to feel the shift in his mother's energy, from despair to desperate focus. "Mama," he said on the 3rd evening, watching her bent over the journals, "what are you doing?" Lorelei looked up at her son. His dark hair needed cutting. His face was too thin. He had Caleb's eyes, serious and searching eyes that demanded truth, even when lies might be kinder. "I'm learning Tad," she said. "Learning what?" "How to keep us alive." Tad considered this. "Is it in Papa's books?" "Yes." "Can I help?" Lorelei felt her throat tighten. This boy, 8 years old, and asking if he could help save his own life. "Come here," she said. He came. She pulled him onto her lap, though he was really getting too big for it, and opened one of the journals to a diagram Caleb had drawn. It showed a cross-section of Earth layers with temperature gradients marked at different depths. "See this," she said, pointing. "Your papa discovered that the Earth stays warm. Even in winter, when the air is freezing, the ground stays at a constant temperature, about as warm as a cool day in spring." Tad studied the diagram with the intensity of a scholar. "How?" "The sun warms the earth all summer. The heat soaks down into the rock, and rock holds heat, like a battery holds electricity. Do you understand? I think so, Tad said. The ground remembers summer. Yes, Lorelei said, and her voice caught. Yes, exactly. The ground remembers summer. So we're going to use the ground to stay warm. We're going to try. Tad looked up at her with those serious eyes. Will it work? Lorelei could have lied, could have given him certainty. But she had promised herself she would never lie to her children about things that mattered. I don't know, sweetheart, but it's the best chance we have. Tad nodded slowly. Then we should do it. He slid off her lap, walked to the stack of journals, and picked up the one with the map. This one says we're right. Right. Then tomorrow I'll help. I can read Papa's writing. I can help you build. He was 8. He should have been playing, running wild, being a child. Instead, he was offering to help construct the thing that might save or doom them all. All right, Lorelei said softly. Tomorrow you help. That night, she wrote in the margin of Caleb's journal in her own less elegant hand. I found your cave. I understand what you were trying to tell me. I don't know if I can do this, but I'm going to try. For them. For us. For you. I wish you were here. I wish you could tell me if I'm understanding correctly. But you're not here. So I have to trust that you trusted me. And I have to be enough. The earth remembers the sun. I'll try to remember everything you taught me. She did not sign it. There was no need. In some way she could not quite articulate, she felt that the journal was a conversation now. Caleb speaking to her from the past. She speaking to him from the desperate present. Both of them reaching toward a future that depended on limestone and heat and faith. The work began in earnest the next morning. Lorelei took both children to Widow Marlowe's small cabin at the edge of town. The old woman opened the door, took one look at Lorelei's set jaw and bleeding hands, and simply nodded. You need someone to mind the little ones, Prudence said. It was not a question. For a few hours each day, I can't pay. Not now. But I will. Eventually. Prudence waved a gnarled hand. Lost 2 husbands, girl. I know what it is to scramble. Bring them over. They can help me with small things. Keep an old woman company. Thank you, Lorelei said, and meant it with a depth that had no bottom. With Tad and Goldie safe, Lorelei returned to the cave. She brought tools, rope, a wheelbarrow, and a determination that felt like iron in her bones. The first task was clearing. She hauled out loose rock bucket by bucket, wheelbarrow load by wheelbarrow load. Her back ached. Her hands blistered, then bled, then calloused. She did not stop, could not stop. Because every day that passed was one day closer to winter. She worked from dawn until she could no longer see. Came home to her children exhausted and covered in dust. Made them simple meals, read to Goldie. Let Tad read passages from Caleb's journals aloud, his young voice stumbling over technical terms determined to understand. After a week, the cave floor was clear, smooth, ready. After 2 weeks, she had widened the entrance enough to bring in larger stones. built a low retaining wall around the opening using rocks. She pried from the hillside and mortar she mixed from clay and sand and straw. She was not digging a grave, though she knew that was what the town whispered. She was excavating a womb, a place of safety, of warmth, of life. On a cool afternoon in early October, she made the trek to the blacksmith's forge at the far end of Frost Hollow Ridge. The smith, Tobias Crane, was a man of 50 with arms like oak branches and a face that had forgotten how to smile sometime in the past decade. He looked up from the horseshoe he was shaping as Lorelei entered. "Mrs. Ashford," he said. His voice was like gravel. "Condolences on your husband." "Thank you, Mr. Crane. What can I do for you?" Lorelei pulled a list from her pocket. Caleb's handwriting, precise and numbered. "I need fire brick, the dense kind, heat resistant, and iron pipe, 3-inch diameter, about 40 feet total. And if you have any scrap cast iron sheeting, I'll take that too." Tobias took the list, read it. His eyebrows climbed toward his hairline. "This is specific. This is for a specialized stove or furnace." "Yes. You building something? I'm trying." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he walked to the back of his forge into the shadowed storage area. Came back with a crate. Opened it. Inside were fire bricks. Good ones. Exactly the type specified on the list. "Your husband ordered these," Tobias said quietly. "Last year. September, I think. Paid half up front. Said he'd be back for them." Lorelei felt the world tilt slightly. "He ordered them." "Yes, ma'am. Had very specific requirements. Even drew me a diagram." Tobias pulled a folded paper from a drawer, unfolded it. It was Caleb's hand. A drawing of what looked like a masonry stove, a combustion chamber, a long serpentine flue path, notes about thermal mass and heat exchange and complete combustion. "He was planning this," Lorelei said softly. He knew. Tobias looked at her with something that might have been respect. "Knew what?" "That he might not make it back. That we'd need this." She looked up at the blacksmith. "How much do I owe you?" He paid half. Other half is $30. $30 might as well have been $3,000. "I can't pay that now, but I will. I swear I will." Tobias studied her. Her bleeding hands, her too thin frame, her eyes that were somewhere beyond desperate and into a territory that had no name. "I knew your husband," he said finally. "Not well, but I knew him. Good man, smart, little strange maybe, but good. He was. He said if anything happened to him, I should help his wife. Said you'd know what to do with these materials. Said you were smarter than you gave yourself credit for." Lorelei felt tears threaten, pushed them back. "He said that," word for word, Tobias began loading fire bricks into a canvas sack. "Take them. Pay me when you can. Spring. Summer. 5 years from now. I don't care. Just build whatever it is he thought you could build." "Thank you," Lorelei whispered. "Don't thank me yet. Thank me if it works." She hauled the materials back to the cave in multiple trips, using the wheelbarrow. and a determination that felt like madness. Each journey took an hour. She made 7 trips. By the time she finished, the sun was setting and her entire body felt like it had been beaten with hammers. But she had everything she needed. That night, Tad asked to see what she was building. She took him and Goldie up the hill by lamplight, showed them the cave, the cleared floor, the stacked fire bricks, the iron pipe. Goldie's eyes went wide. "We're going to live in there." "For the winter, yes." "Like bears?" Goldie asked. "Like smart bears," Lorelei said. "Bears that use science." Tad walked the perimeter, examining everything with the careful attention of a small engineer. "It's warm in here." "It is. Even though there's no fire." "That's because the earth holds heat," Lorelei said. "Remember what Papa's journal said?" Tad nodded slowly. "The earth remembers summer." "Exactly. But it's not summer warm. It's just not winter cold. Right now, yes. But when I build the stove, when we make heat and store it in the stone, it will get warmer. Warm enough." Tad looked at his mother. "How does the stove work?" Lorelei pulled Caleb's diagram from her pocket, showed him. "Most stoves burn wood and send the heat straight up the chimney. They're loud, hot, but wasteful. This stove will burn the wood completely. No smoke. And instead of sending the heat up a chimney, we send it through these pipes. The pipes run through this bench we're going to build, made of stone and clay. Heavy. The hot air heats the bench. The bench stores the heat. And even after the fire goes out, the bench keeps radiating warmth. For hours, maybe days." "That's smart," Tad said. "Your papa was smart." "But you're building it." Lorelei looked at her son. "I'm trying." "You'll do it," Tad said with the absolute certainty of childhood. "Papa left you the plans. You'll figure it out." Lorelei wished she had a fraction of his confidence. The construction of the thermal mass heater took 2 weeks of work that left Lorelei questioning her sanity and her strength in equal measure. Following Caleb's precise diagrams, she built the combustion chamber at the back of the cave, using the fire bricks Tobias had given her. The bricks had to be fitted perfectly, leaving no gaps, creating a chamber that would force the fire to burn sideways and then up through a vertical riser. This was the key Caleb had written. The fire must burn hot. Hotter than a normal stove. Hot enough to consume everything. No smoke. Just superheated gases. She mixed mortar from clay and sand. Fitted each brick with hands that cramped and bled. Tad helped where he could, reading the instructions aloud, double-checking measurements, acting as her assistant, in a project neither of them fully understood but both were committed to completing. The vertical riser was insulated with layers of clay and ash, forcing the heat to concentrate to build to create the intense draft that would pull the fire to completion. It took 3 tries to get it right. 3 times Lorelei tore down what she had built and started over. Because close was not good enough. Almost was not good enough. In the mathematics of survival, there was only right and dead. Once the combustion chamber was complete, she began on the bench. This was the thermal mass, the battery, the thing that would store heat and release it slowly, faithfully, hour after hour after hour. She built it in a serpentine shape, snaking from the back of the cave toward the entrance. Inside the bench was a channel, a passage for hot air to travel. The pipe she had gotten from Tobias ran through this channel surrounded by stone and clay and packed earth. Heavy, dense, a sponge for heat. The work was back-breaking. Each stone had to be placed. Each handful of clay had to be mixed, shaped, smoothed. She worked until her hands would not close, until her back spasmed, until she could barely stand. And then she worked more. Widow Marlowe watched the children during the days. In the evenings, Lorelei would stumble home, feed them simple meals, fall asleep at the table only to wake before dawn and do it again. Goldie asked questions. "Why do you come home so dirty, Mama? When will we move to the bear cave? Will there be room for my doll?" Tad asked different questions. "How hot does the fire need to be? How long will the bench hold heat? What if it doesn't work?" Lorelei answered as honestly as she could. She did not know if it would work. She had never built anything like this. She was a school teacher, not an engineer. But she had Caleb's plans, and she had desperation. And those two things together made a kind of expertise born not of knowledge but of necessity. By mid-October, the structure was complete. The combustion chamber, the heat riser, the serpentine bench with its hidden channel, the exit pipe that would vent the cooled gases outside. It looked strange, primitive, like something ancient humans might have built by instinct. It was time to test it. She chose an evening when Tad and Goldie were at Widow Marlowe's. If this went wrong, if the cave filled with smoke, if the structure collapsed or caught fire, or any of the 1,000 things that could go wrong went wrong, she did not want them there. She built a small fire in the combustion chamber, used dry kindling, paper, a match. The fire caught, began to grow, and then the smoke came. It billowed out of the combustion chamber, filled the cave in seconds, thick, choking. Lorelei stumbled outside, coughing, eyes streaming. Her heart was a hammer. She had failed, built it wrong, misunderstood, killed them all before winter even arrived. She stood outside the cave, hands on her knees, trying to breathe, trying not to scream, trying to figure out where she had gone wrong. And then she heard Caleb's voice. Not real. Memory. A conversation from years ago when he had tried to explain convection. The draw needs heat to create draft love. Cold stone won't pull. You have to be patient. Let it warm. Be patient. Let it warm. Lorelei straightened, wiped her eyes, waited. 5 minutes, 10, 15, and then slowly the smoke inside the cave began to clear, not billowing out the entrance, disappearing, being pulled up the heat riser, through the bench, out the exit pipe. The draw was starting. She went back inside. The fire was burning brighter now, cleaner. The smoke was gone. Only heat remained. Heat that was being pulled through the system exactly as Caleb had designed. It was working. Lorelei sat on the cave floor and laughed, a sound that was half hysteria, half triumph. She had done it. She had built a thing that should not be possible, a thing that defied common sense and conventional wisdom and everything Silas Breckenridge knew about heating a home. She had built hope, Over the next week, she refined the system, learned how much wood to use, how to control the burn, how to read the heat signature of the bench to know when it needed feeding again. She moved their few belongings into the cave: 2 beds, a small table, Caleb's journals, Goldie's doll, Tad's collection of interesting rocks, the things that made them a family. She hung cloth on the walls to soften the stone, laid down woven mats, created a kitchen area near the entrance where the light was better, built shelves for food storage, made it not just a shelter, but a home. Tad and Goldie moved in with the solemnity of pioneers claiming new territory. Goldie immediately designated a corner as her side and arranged her few possessions with the seriousness of someone furnishing a palace. Tad explored every inch, asking questions about the stove, the bench, the way heat traveled. That first night in the cave, Lorelei lit the fire properly, let it burn for 2 hours, fed the combustion chamber slowly, completely, watched as the bench began to warm, as the entire space began to feel less like a cave and more like a sanctuary. After the fire died down, the heat remained, radiating from the bench, from the walls, from the floor itself. The children slept in their beds without shivering, without the sound of wind screaming through gaps in logs, without frost forming on the walls. They slept warm. Lorelei sat on the heated bench, her back against stone that remembered summer, and allowed herself to hope. But the world outside did not care about hope. The world outside had its own opinions. It was Silas Breckenridge who came first. He appeared at the cave entrance on a gray afternoon in late October. Lorelei was teaching Goldie her letters by lamplight. Tad was outside gathering the small sticks and branches they used for fuel. The knock on the wooden door she had fashioned startled them both. Lorelei opened it to find Silas standing there, his face a landscape of concern and disbelief. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, "I've heard rumors. I needed to see for myself." "Mr. Breckenridge, may I come in?" Lorelei hesitated, then stepped aside. Silas entered, ducking his head slightly under the low ceiling near the entrance. His eyes adjusted to the lamplight, took in the cave, the beds, the table, the strange bench running along the wall, the small iron door of the combustion chamber. He turned slowly, cataloging everything. When he faced her again, his expression was a complicated mix of emotions Lorelei could not entirely read. "You're living here," he said. "We are. In a cave." "Yes." "Mrs. Ashford." He said her name like a prayer for the condemned. "This is not a home. This is a hole in the ground. You cannot raise children in a hole in the ground. The children are fine, Mr. Breckenridge. They're warm. They're healthy. They're safe." "Safe." His voice rose slightly. "You've built some kind of stove in here. There's no proper chimney. You'll suffocate. You'll fill this space with smoke and poison, and your children will die in their sleep." Goldie looked up from her letters, eyes wide. Lorelei kept her voice calm. "The stove is designed not to smoke. The combustion is complete. The gases are vented outside through that pipe." She pointed. Silas looked at the pipe, looked back at her. "Who designed this?" "My husband." "Your husband was a geologist, not an engineer." "My husband studied thermodynamics, heat flow, earth science. This stove uses principles he spent years researching." "Researching is not building." Theory is not practice. Mrs. Ashford, please, I'm begging you. Come back down to your cabin. Let me install a proper stove. Let me make things right before it's too late. He meant well. Lorelei could see that. He genuinely believed he was trying to save her from her own ignorance, from the dangerous foolishness of trusting dead man's theories over living man's proven methods. I appreciate your concern, Mr. Breckenridge, Lorelei said, but we're staying here. Why? The word was almost a shout, frustration breaking through his careful civility. Why would you choose this when I'm offering you help, offering you safety? Because your stove is hungry, Lorelei said quietly. It eats and is never full, and the heat it gives flies straight up and out. It heats the ceiling and leaves the floor cold. It's a war that can't be won. Silas stared at her as if she had started speaking in tongues. I have installed 60 stoves in this territory. 60 families trust my work, my judgment. I'm sure they do. Then why don't you? Because I trust my husband more. The words hung in the air between them. Not hostile, not cruel, just true. Silas opened his mouth, closed it. Whatever argument he had been planning died on his tongue. Finally, he said, when winter comes, real winter, when the temperature is 40 below and the wind is screaming and you're burning through wood faster than you can cut it, when your children are crying from cold, you remember this conversation? He turned and walked out of the cave without another word. Lorelei closed the door behind him, turned to find Goldie watching her with worried eyes. Is Mr. Breckenridge angry, Mama? No, sweetheart, he's scared. Scared of what? Scared that he might be wrong. But late that night, after the children were asleep and the cave was warm and quiet, Lorelei allowed herself to feel the weight of Silas's warning. What if he was right? What if she was trusting theory over practice? What if her husband's brilliance did not translate into real-world survival? She opened the final journal, the one she had not fully read yet, turned to the last pages, and there, folded into the back cover, she found a letter, addressed to her in Caleb's hand. Her fingers shook as she unfolded it. My dearest Lorelei, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have found the cave, and you are afraid. I want you to know something. You are the bravest person I have ever met. Not because you are fearless, but because you move forward even when afraid. I have left you plans, diagrams, calculations, but you may doubt them. You may doubt yourself. The world will tell you I was a fool, that you are a fool, that only proven methods are safe. Do not listen. The earth does not forget the sun. It holds heat through the darkest winter. And you, my love, you hold more strength than you know. Build the stove. Trust the stone. Trust yourself. And when it works, when you and our children are warm, while the world freezes, remember, you did this, not me. I gave you a map. But you walked the road. You built the shelter. You saved our family. I love you. I have always loved you. I will love you from whatever place I am now. And I am proud of you. So very proud. Do not doubt. You are enough. You have always been enough. Yours in this world and the next, Caleb. Lorelei read the letter 3 times. Then she folded it carefully, held it against her chest, and cried in a way she had not allowed herself to cry since the funeral. These were not tears of grief, not tears of fear. They were tears of recognition, of being seen, of being trusted by a man who was gone but whose faith in her remained solid as stone. When she could breathe again, she tucked the letter into her own journal, the one she had started keeping, a record of what she was building, what she was becoming. On a fresh page, she wrote, "Caleb, I found your letter. I understand now. You always saw me more clearly than I saw myself. I will not doubt. I will trust the stone. I will trust what you taught me. And I will make sure our children know that their father saved them, not with his presence, but with his faith. The earth remembers the sun, and I will remember you." November arrived with frost and rumors of an early winter. The Ute traders who brought news from the southern territories spoke of signs, migration patterns, cloud formations, the thickness of animal fur. All of it pointed to the same conclusion. White death was coming, a winter harder than any in living memory. The town of Frost Hollow Ridge prepared. Men worked from dawn to dusk, felling trees, splitting logs, stacking wood in fortresses around their homes. Silas Breckenridge's lumber operation ran at capacity. Every family bought as much seasoned wood as they could afford. Some sold possessions to buy more. Lorelei watched from a distance and did not join the panic. She had wood, enough for her needs. Small, careful fires twice a day. Nothing like the cord after cord being consumed in testing conventional stoves for the winter to come. Word of her strange living situation had spread. People whispered, some with pity, others with judgment, a few with outright hostility. One woman, Catherine Dalton, stopped Lorelei at the general store. Catherine had been at school with her, had married well, had comfort and position, and very strong opinions about proper behavior. "Lorelei," Catherine said, her voice honey-coated concern, "I've heard you're living in a cave with the children. Please tell me it's not true." "It's true," Lorelei said. "Oh, honey." Catherine reached out, touched Lorelei's arm. "You don't have to do this. There are people who can help. Proper help. Not this desperate, dangerous situation you've put yourself in." "I'm not desperate," Lorelei said quietly. "And it's not dangerous. You're living in a hole with some kind of homemade stove. That's the definition of dangerous. My husband designed it. Your husband was not a builder. Silas Breckenridge is a builder. Listen to him. Accept his help. Before it's too late." Lorelei looked at Catherine, saw the genuine concern, saw also the judgment, the assumption that grief had driven her mad, that a woman alone could not possibly know what she was doing. "Thank you for your concern," Lorelei said. "But we're fine." She paid for her flour and cornmeal and left the store with Catherine's pitying eyes following her. That evening, Tad asked about the conversation. He had been nearby, had heard. "Mama, why do they think you're wrong?" Lorelei thought about how to answer. Finally, she said, "Because what we're doing is different, and people fear different. They think the way things have always been done is the only way they can be done. But Papa found a better way. He did. So they're wrong. They don't know they're wrong yet. and they won't until winter proves it. And if they never admit it, Lorelei smiled tiredly, then at least we'll be alive and warm to not care. The first snow came on November 12th. Just a dusting, a warning shot. But it was enough to send a fresh wave of anxiety through Frost Hollow Ridge. And it was enough to bring one more visitor to the cave. Jasper Breckenridge was 12 years old, tall for his age, with his father's build, but his mother's gentler eyes. He came alone in the early evening, knocked hesitantly on the cave door. Lorelei opened it to find the boy standing there, hands shoved in his pockets, looking uncertain. "Jasper," she said, "does your father know you're here?" "No, ma'am." "Then why are you here?" "I wanted to see," he said simply. "Father says you're living dangerously, that you don't understand what you're doing, but I wanted to see for myself." Lorelei considered sending him away. Then she stepped aside. "Come in." Jasper entered. His eyes went wide. The cave was warm. The lamplight was soft. Tad sat at the table writing in a notebook. Goldie was playing with her doll on the heated bench, bare feet, wearing only a light dress. Both children looked healthy, happy, comfortable. "It's warm," Jasper said, and there was wonder in his voice. "It is," Lorelei agreed. "But there's no fire." There was, this morning. It heated the bench. The bench is still warm. It will stay warm until tomorrow morning when we light the fire again. Jasper walked over to the bench, touched it tentatively. "It's like it's alive." "In a way it is," Lorelei said. "It breathes in heat and breathes it out slowly. Father's stove at home doesn't do that. It goes cold an hour after the fire dies." "I know." Jasper turned to look at her. "He says you'll die here. I know he thinks that." "Will you?" Lorelei met the boy's eyes, saw the genuine question there, the fear for them, but also something else, a kind of hope. "No, Jasper, we won't." "How can you be sure?" "Because this is based on science, on the way the earth holds heat, on principles that don't change just because they're different from what people are used to." Tad looked up from his notebook. "My papa was smart, smarter than anyone. He wouldn't leave us something that didn't work." Jasper looked at Tad. Two boys nearly the same age, one with a father, one without. "My father is smart, too." "I'm sure he is," Lorelei said gently. "But smart people can be wrong, especially if they only know one way of doing things." Jasper stood there for a long moment, processing. Finally, he said, "I should go, before Father misses me." "Jasper," Lorelei said as he turned to leave, "you can come back, any time, if you want to learn how this works." The boy nodded. Then he was gone into the gathering darkness. Tad looked at his mother. "His father will be angry if he finds out he came here." "Probably. But you invited him back anyway. Because maybe if he sees that we're all right, he'll tell his father. And maybe his father will listen to him the way he won't listen to me." "Will it work?" Lorelei smiled. "I don't know, Tad. But it can't hurt to try." That night, as Lorelei lay in her bed with Goldie curled beside her, and Tad in his own small cot, she listened to the sound of wind beginning to pick up outside. The first real wind of winter, testing the mountain, looking for weakness. In her old cabin, that wind would have howled through every gap, every crack, every poorly fitted log. It would have stolen warmth and brought cold and made sleep impossible. Here in the cave, it was a distant whisper. The stone walls held. The earth held. The carefully built door held. They were safe. They were warm. They were alive. And winter, the great white death that everyone feared, had not even truly begun. The months between November and March moved with the strange dual pace of winter in the high country. Days that felt endless. Weeks that vanished like smoke. Lorelei and her children lived in their cave, warm and hidden, while above them the town of Frost Hollow Ridge prepared for the war everyone knew was coming. December brought snow. January brought more. February was a month of white silence and smoke rising from every chimney in thin, desperate columns. The wood piles that had seemed so immense in autumn began to shrink. Men spent their days splitting logs and their nights feeding stoves that screamed their heat into frozen air and achieved nothing but the temporary illusion of comfort. In the cave, Lorelei burned 2 small fires a day, morning and evening. Each fire lasted perhaps 90 minutes. The thermal mass bench absorbed the heat, held it close, released it in a slow exhalation that lasted through the night and into the next day. She used 1/10 of the wood her neighbors burned. Less than that, maybe. And her children played barefoot on warm stone while other children shivered under piles of quilts. Jasper Breckenridge came back 3 times during those months, always alone, always in the early evening when his father was still at the lumber mill. He would sit with Tad and watch Lorelei tend the fire, ask questions about thermal mass and combustion temperature and how stone could remember heat. She answered every question, taught him the way Caleb had taught her, with patience and precision and the understanding that knowledge was not something to be hoarded but shared. The 3rd time, Jasper asked, "Does your mother know you come here?" The boy looked down at his hands. "She knows. She doesn't tell Father." "Why not?" "Because she's worried about me. About us. She says our stove eats wood like a starving animal, and the house is still cold. She says maybe you know something Father doesn't." Lorelei said nothing. There was nothing to say. The proof would come soon enough. By early March, the tension in Frost Hollow Ridge was a physical presence. Wood piles had dwindled to almost nothing. The winter had been hard, yes, but not yet catastrophic. Not yet the white death the Ute traders had promised. But everyone could feel it. The pressure building, the temperature dropping degree by degree, the wind shifting to come from the north, from Canada, from the Arctic wastes that knew nothing of mercy. On March 10th, the sky turned the color of old bruises, gray and purple and green all at once. The air went still, not peaceful, expectant, like the held breath before a scream. Lorelei stood outside the cave that evening, watching the sky, and knew what was coming. She had read Caleb's journals, had seen his notes on the blizzard of 1864, when the high country had been buried under snow for a week, and the temperature had not risen above 40 below. He had written, "When the sky goes green and the wind stops run, find shelter. Stay there." She looked down at the town below, saw the smoke from 60 chimneys, saw the lights in windows, saw people moving about, hurrying to finish last preparations. stacking wood, checking stoves, boarding windows. Silas Breckenridge stood in his doorway. Even from this distance, Lorelei could see the set of his shoulders. Confident, ready. A man who had prepared correctly and knew it. She felt a strange pang of something that was not quite pity, but close to it. He had done everything right according to the wisdom he possessed, had built his fortress of wood, had installed the best stove money could buy, had followed every rule and proven method, and it would not be enough. She turned and went back into the cave. Tad and Goldie were already in their nightclothes. Goldie was arranging her doll and the small cloth animals Widow Marlowe had sewn for her. Tad sat at the table reading one of Caleb's journals by lamplight, his lips moving slightly as he sounded out the harder words. Lorelei checked the cave one final time. The door was solid. Heavy wood backed with layers of packed straw and clay for insulation. The leather hinges she had made were strong. The small ventilation pipe near the ceiling was clear. The food stores were organized and accessible. The water barrel was full, fed by a trickle from a spring at the back of the cave that never froze. Everything was ready. She went to the combustion chamber, built the fire with more care than usual, fed it slowly, evenly, watching the flames find their rhythm, watched as the heat began to rise through the riser flow, through the serpentine channel. In the bench heat, the mass of stone and clay and earth. The fire burned for 2 hours, longer than usual. She wanted the thermal mass fully charged, wanted every possible degree of heat stored in that stone before the storm arrived. When she finally closed the iron door and let the fire die to embers, the bench was almost too hot to touch comfortably. She could feel the heat radiating, could see the air shimmer slightly above the clay surface. "Mama," Goldie said from her bed, "why did you make such a big fire?" "Because tomorrow we might not be able to make one at all," Lorelei said. "The storm is coming. A bad one. We'll stay inside until it passes." "How long?" Tad asked. "I don't know. Days, maybe. And we'll be warm the whole time." Lorelei looked at her son, saw the trust in his eyes, the absolute faith that his mother knew what she was doing. It was a weight almost too heavy to bear. "Yes," she said. "We'll be warm." She hoped she was not lying. That night, Lorelei did not sleep. She lay in her bed listening. The wind began around midnight, not gradually, all at once, like a switch had been thrown. It came from the north with a sound that was not quite a howl and not quite a scream, but something in between, something that had teeth. She got up, lit a candle, went to the door, opened it a crack. The world outside was already disappearing. Snow fell not in flakes but in sheets, horizontal, driven by wind that hit with physical force. She could not see 10 feet beyond the entrance, could barely see the outline of the rocks she had placed as markers. The temperature had dropped. She could feel it even in the few seconds the door was open. 20 below, maybe. 30. And falling. She closed the door, barred it, went back to bed. The storm had begun. In his house at the edge of town, Silas Breckenridge stood before his Iron King 500 stove and felt something he had not felt in 30 years of building: doubt. The stove was magnificent, 3 feet tall, cast iron with elaborate scrollwork and a front door that opened to reveal a firebox large enough to take logs 2 feet long. It was the crown jewel of his inventory, the stove he recommended to only his wealthiest clients. He owned one himself because he could, because it was the best, because best was what a master builder deserved. The fire inside roared. He could hear it. A freight train of combustion. The metal sides glowed dull red. The heat it threw was intense enough to make him step back. And yet, the corners of the room were cold. Ice was already forming on the inside of the windows. His wife, Margaret, sat close to the stove, wrapped in 3 shawls. Jasper lay on a pallet even closer, covered in quilts. And still Silas could hear his son's teeth chattering. The stack effect was ferocious. Every bit of hot air the stove produced rocketed straight up to the ceiling, pooled there uselessly, and escaped through the gaps in the roof boards, while cold air was sucked in through every crack at floor level to replace it. He was not heating the house. He was heating the sky. Silas fed another log into the stove, then another. The pile of wood beside the stove, which had seemed adequate when he brought it in at dusk, was already half gone. He looked at the window, could not see through it. The world outside was white chaos. How long would this last? The Ute traders had said days. 3, 4, maybe more. He had wood for 3 days if he was careful. If the temperature stayed merely cold instead of catastrophic. But the temperature was not staying merely cold. It was dropping with a speed that felt malicious, intentional, as if the storm knew where his weakness was and was probing for it. "Father," Jasper said from his pallet, "I'm cold." "I know, son. Come closer to the stove." "I'm as close as I can get without burning." Silas looked at his boy, 12 years old, strong, healthy, the pride of his life, and he was shivering 3 feet from a stove that was consuming wood at a rate that would bankrupt most families. "Margaret," Silas said, "bring more blankets." "We're using all the blankets we own," his wife said quietly. For the first time in a very long time, Silas Breckenridge did not know what to do. Dawn came to the cave not with light, but with awareness. Lorelei woke to find Goldie curled against her like a cat seeking warmth. But the child was not cold. None of them were cold. The cave was still warm, not hot, not the scorching heat that Silas's stove would throw. Just a deep, pervasive, comfortable warmth that came from everywhere at once. She slipped out of bed carefully, not waking her daughter, went to the bench, placed her palm flat against the clay surface, still warm, not as hot as last night, but warm, radiating, giving back what it had been given. She checked her pocket watch, 6 in the morning. The fire had died 12 hours ago, and the thermal mass was still working, still heating the space, still keeping them alive. Tad stirred in his cot, sat up, rubbed his eyes. "Is it still storming?" "I think so," Lorelei said. "But we're all right." The boy got up, walked to the door. "Can I look?" "Just a crack. Don't let the cold in." Tad opened the door perhaps 6 inches. The howl of wind intensified immediately. Snow tried to force its way in. He looked for a moment, then closed the door quickly. "I can't see anything," he said. "It's all white." "That's the storm. Are the other people okay in town?" Lorelei thought about how to answer. Settled on honesty. "I hope so. They have stoves. They have wood. They'll do their best. But their stoves aren't like ours." "No. So they'll be colder." "Probably." Tad was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'm glad Papa knew about the earth remembering the sun." "So am I, sweetheart." Goldie woke an hour later. Lorelei made them a simple breakfast. Cornmeal mush with a bit of honey. Widow Marlowe had given them hot tea. They ate at the table, the lamp casting warm light, the bench radiating its patient heat. And for a little while it was possible to forget that outside the world was trying to kill them. After breakfast, Lorelei taught Goldie her letters. Tad read from his father's journals, asking questions about thermal conductivity and specific heat capacity. Lorelei answered as best she could, sometimes reading passages aloud, sometimes improvising when the concepts were too complex for easy explanation. By midday, she checked the bench again. The surface was cooler now. Not cold, not even cool really, but cooler. She could feel the difference. She did the mathematics in her head. The fire had been out for 18 hours. The bench had lost perhaps 20% of its stored heat. At this rate, it would hold for another day, maybe two. But she also knew that the second day was always harder than the first. The thermal mass would continue to radiate, yes, but at a decreasing rate. The cave would stay warmer than the outside, absolutely, but it might drop to 60 degrees. 55. How cold could it get before it became dangerous? Before the children started to suffer? She did not know. Caleb's journals did not say. This was uncharted territory. For the first time since the storm began, Lorelei felt fear touch her spine with cold fingers. In Silas Breckenridge's house, the second day was a slow descent into crisis. The woodpile he had brought inside was gone by noon. He had burned through it in 18 hours. Burned logs that should have lasted 3 days in half a day because the cold was so profound and the stack effect so vicious that the stove could not work fast enough to make a difference. He went outside to get more wood. The storm hit him like a physical assault. Wind that knocked him sideways. Snow so thick it was like drowning in frozen water. Cold that found every gap in his clothing and drove needles of pain into his skin. The woodpile was 15 feet from the door. It took him 10 minutes to reach it. The snow had drifted against it, covering the wood in a white shroud. He dug frantically, his hands already going numb, and pulled free an armload of logs. The trip back to the house took longer. He could not see the door. Could not see anything. Navigation was by feel and memory and desperate hope. When he finally found the door, stumbled inside, dropped the wood. His hands were white and senseless. Margaret had to help him pull off his gloves. Had to rub his fingers until the blood came back. And the pain made him gasp. "You can't go out there again," she said. "We need wood. Then we ration what you brought. But you can't go out there. You'll die." Silas looked at the small pile of logs he had managed to retrieve. 8 logs. Maybe 10 hours worth if he fed the stove sparingly. And then what? He looked at Jasper. The boy had stopped shivering. That should have been good news. But Silas knew enough to know it was not. When you stopped shivering, it meant your body was giving up, conserving resources for core functions, letting the extremities go. "Jasper," he said, his voice rough. "How are you feeling?" "Tired, Father. Very tired." "Stay awake for me. Can you do that?" "I'll try." Margaret met Silas's eyes over their son's head. Her face was pale. Her lips were blue at the edges. She did not say anything. She did not have to. They were losing. By the evening of the second day, Lorelei faced a decision that felt like judgment. The bench had cooled significantly. The cave temperature had dropped to 62 degrees, still warm by any reasonable measure, still far warmer than the outside where the temperature had plummeted to something approaching 50 below zero, but cool enough that Goldie had asked for an extra blanket, cool enough that Lorelei could see her breath when she exhaled. She had wood for one fire. She could light it now. Recharge the thermal mass. Bring the temperature back up to comfortable levels. The children would be warm tonight. Tomorrow would be easier. But if the storm lasted longer than expected, if this was only the second day of a 4-day or 5-day siege, then using wood now meant having less wood later, meant potentially facing the worst of the storm with no fuel, and a cold thermal mass, and children who were already at the edge of their endurance. The mathematics were cruel. She could make them comfortable now and risk disaster later, or she could make them uncomfortable now and save the fuel for when they truly needed it. Lorelei sat on the cooling bench and pulled out Caleb's journal, the one with the technical specifications, the one with the heat retention calculations. She found the formula for thermal mass cooling rate, read it 3 times, did the math with a pencil on scrap paper, double-checking each number, each variable. The bench would hold heat for 72 hours at a gradually decreasing rate. It had been 48 hours since the last fire. That meant she had 24 hours remaining before the thermal mass reached equilibrium with the ambient cave temperature. If she waited, if she held off lighting the fire until tomorrow morning, she could stretch the fuel, could make sure that when the storm reached its peak, when the cold was most vicious, they would have the resources to fight back. It was the smart choice, the strategic choice, the choice Caleb would have made. It was also the choice that meant her children would spend the night at 60 degrees instead of 70, would wake up cold, would ask her why she was not making a fire, would trust her to keep them safe, even as she let them suffer. Tad looked up from his reading. "Mama, are you going to light the fire?" Lorelei met her son's eyes. "Not tonight." "Why not?" "Because I need to save the wood, in case the storm lasts longer. It's getting colder in here. I know. Will we be all right?" This was the moment where she could lie, could reassure him with false certainty, could make the fear go away with words that meant nothing. She did not lie. "I think so," she said, "but I'm not completely sure. What I am sure of is that if we use all our wood now and the storm keeps going, we'll be in real danger. So we have to be cold tonight so we can be warm later." Tad processed this. He was 8 years old, but he was also Caleb Ashford's son. A child raised on truth and science and the understanding that sometimes the right choice was the hard choice. "All right," he said finally. "We'll be cold tonight, but we'll be together." Lorelei felt her throat close. "Yes, baby, we'll be together." That night was the longest of Lorelei's life. They piled every blanket they owned onto the two beds, slept in their clothes, huddled together for warmth. The cave temperature dropped to 58 degrees, cold enough to see breath, cold enough to make sleep difficult, but not cold enough to kill. Goldie whimpered in her sleep. Tad pressed close to his mother, and Lorelei lay awake, one arm around each child, and prayed to a God she was not sure she believed in, that she had made the right choice. In her mind, she talked to Caleb, told him about the decision, about the fear, about the weight of holding two lives in her hands and hoping her mathematics were correct. And in the silence of the cave, with the storm screaming outside and her children breathing softly against her, she imagined she could hear his voice. "You're doing it right, love. Trust the numbers. Trust yourself." When dawn came pale and gray through the ventilation pipe, Lorelei extracted herself carefully from the tangle of children and blankets. Her body ached from the cold and the tension. Her hands were stiff, but she was alive. They were alive. She checked the bench one final time. The surface was barely warmer than the air. The thermal mass had given everything it had. It was time. She built the fire with hands that shook slightly, not from cold, from relief, from the knowledge that she had made it, had gambled and won, had trusted Caleb's calculations and her own judgment and been proven right. The fire caught, grew. The familiar sound of combustion of air being pulled through the system filled the cave. She fed it slowly, carefully, watching the flames dance in the heat riser. After an hour, she could feel the bench beginning to warm. After 2 hours, it was radiating heat again. The cave temperature climbed. 60 degrees, 65, 70. Tad woke, sat up, smiled. "You did it, Mama." "We did it," Lorelei corrected. "You were brave. You trusted me. That helped." "Is the storm still going?" Lorelei checked the door, opened it a crack. The wind had died somewhat. The snow was still falling, but not with the same violent intensity. The worst had passed. "I think it's ending," she said. Goldie stirred, stretched, sat up. "I'm hungry." "Then let's have breakfast," Lorelei said. "A warm one." She made oatmeal on the small cooking surface at the top of the combustion chamber. Added dried apples and a bit of cinnamon. Luxuries but earned. They sat at the table and ate while the bench warmed and the cave became home again. After breakfast, Lorelei did something she had not done in 3 days. She wrote in her journal, "Caleb, the storm came. It was everything the traders said it would be. And we survived. Not because of luck, because of you. Because of what you taught me. Because of this system you designed." The bench lost heat over 2 days. I had to choose whether to light the fire or wait. I waited, and it was the right choice. We were cold, but we were safe. The mathematics worked exactly as you said they would. I understand now what you meant when you said the Earth remembers the sun. It's not just about heat storage. It's about patience. About trusting that what you give will be returned. Not immediately, not dramatically, but faithfully. I am warm. The children are warm. And I am learning that I am stronger than I knew. You told me that in your letter. I am beginning to believe it. Thank you. For everything. For this cave. For this knowledge. For believing in me when I did not believe in myself. She closed the journal, looked around the cave, at Tad reading quietly, at Goldie playing with her doll on the now warm bench, at the soft lamplight and the gentle heat, and the absolute safety they had found in a hole in the ground that the whole world had called madness. She had done this, not Caleb, her. She had built it. She had maintained it. She had made the hard choices that kept them alive. For the first time since his death, Lorelei felt something other than grief when she thought of her husband. She felt gratitude. And beneath that, a small, growing kernel of pride. Not pride in what he had left her. Pride in what she had become. In Silas Breckenridge's house, the third day arrived not with relief but with catastrophe. The wood was gone. Every stick, every scrap. They had burned through the entire supply. Silas had even fed the stove furniture. A chair, part of the table. The wooden box that had held Margaret's sewing supplies. Anything that would burn. It was not enough. Jasper was unconscious, not sleeping, unconscious. His skin was gray. His breathing was shallow. Margaret had wrapped him in every piece of fabric in the house, and still the boy's body temperature was dropping. The temperature inside the house was 20 degrees. The stove had gone cold an hour ago. Ice formed on the inside of every surface. Silas sat on the floor, his son in his arms, his wife pressed against his back, and felt 30 years of certainty crumble into nothing. He had been wrong. Not just wrong. Catastrophically, fatally wrong. His stove, his methods, his entire understanding of how to keep a family warm had failed, and his son was dying because of it. "Silas," Margaret whispered. Her voice was weak. "You have to do something?" "There's nothing to do. No wood. Can't get to the pile outside. The storm's still too strong." "Then go get help." "From where? Who?" Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "The Ashford cabin. It's up the hill. Maybe they're dead. Maybe their wood is just sitting there." Silas closed his eyes. The thought had occurred to him. Of course it had. Lorelei and her children living in a cave with a homemade stove and no real shelter were certainly dead by now. Had to be. No one could survive this in a hole in the ground. Their wood would be there, unclaimed, enough to save Jasper. It was grave robbery, scavenging from the dead. The thought made him sick. But his son was dying. "All right," Silas said. "I'll go." He dressed in every layer he owned, wrapped cloth around his face, prepared himself for a journey of 200 yards that would take every ounce of strength he possessed. Before he left, he looked at Margaret. She was crying, not making sound, just tears freezing on her cheeks. "I'll be back," he said. "I know." He opened the door and stepped into the white hell. The wind hit him with the force of a fist. He could not breathe, could not see. could not hear anything except the scream of the storm. He put his head down and began to move. One step, then another, each one an act of will. The snow was hip-deep in places, drift-high in others. He fell twice, got up, kept moving. He had walked this path 100 times, knew every tree, every rock, every turn. But now it was all gone, erased by white. He navigated by feel and instinct and desperate hope. The Ashford cabin materialized out of the snow like a ghost, buried almost to the roofline, dead, empty, exactly as he had predicted. He felt a savage, guilty satisfaction. He had been right. They had not survived. He stumbled toward where he remembered the woodpile being ready to dig, ready to take what he needed to save his son. And then he saw something that made him stop. A path, narrow but clear, leading from the buried cabin up the hill behind it. Someone had kept it open. Recently. The snow in the path was fresh but not deep. Someone was still alive, still moving, still fighting. Silas followed the path on legs that barely worked, up the hill, through scrub oak, over loose rock, and there, carved into the hillside, insulated by earth and stone and the thermal mass of the mountain itself, was the entrance to the cave. A door. A thin stream of heat shimmer rising from a small pipe. The faintest glow of lamplight visible through gaps. They were alive, impossible. Against all logic. Against every rule Silas knew. They were alive. He stumbled forward, fell against the door, pounded on it with hands that had no feeling. The door opened, and Silas Breckenridge, master builder expert on all matters of shelter and warmth, fell through the opening into a wall of heat that hit him like a physical thing. He sprawled on the floor, looked up. Lorelei stood there, not dead, not frozen, not even particularly cold-looking. She wore a simple dress. Her hair was braided. Her face was calm. Behind her, Tad sat at a table reading. Goldie played on what looked like a large bench made of clay and stone. Both children were barefoot. Both looked healthy. Pink-cheeked. Comfortable. The cave was warm. Not just warm. Genuinely, completely, impossibly warm. Warmer than his house had ever been. Warmer than seemed possible without a roaring fire. And yet, there was no fire. The small iron door of the combustion chamber was closed. No flames visible. Just this pervasive, gentle heat that came from everywhere at once. Silas tried to speak. Could not. His jaw would not work. His mind would not process what he was seeing. Lorelei closed the door behind him, shutting out the cold, the storm, the death. She did not say, "I told you so," did not smile with triumph. She simply looked at him with eyes that held understanding and compassion, and a strength he had not seen before. "Mr. Breckenridge," she said quietly, "you're hurt. Let me help you." And Silas Breckenridge, who had come to rob the dead, who had spent 3 months certain this woman was a fool, who had built his entire life on the foundation of his own expertise, began to cry, not from pain, not from cold. From the shattering of everything he thought he knew. From the weight of being catastrophically, unforgivably wrong. From the knowledge that his certainty had nearly killed his son, while this woman's supposed madness had saved hers. Lorelei helped him to the bench. The surface was warm, radiating. She brought him water, a blanket, sat beside him and waited while he collected himself enough to speak. When he finally could, the only word that came out was a question, a plea, a surrender. How? Spring came to Frost Hollow Ridge the way it always did in the high country, slowly, reluctantly, as if winter had to be convinced to loosen its grip one frozen finger at a time. The snow began to melt in late March, not all at once, in patches, on southern slopes, around dark rocks that absorbed what little sun penetrated the thin air. The melt created streams where none had been before, turned the streets of the town into rivers of mud, made travel treacherous and tempers short, but it also meant survival. The White Death had passed. Those who remained had weathered the worst winter in living memory, and they were ready, desperate even to learn how to make sure they never came that close to annihilation again. Lorelei woke one morning in early April to find a line of people outside the cave. 6 families, 12 adults, perhaps 20 children. They stood in the mud and the cold morning air waiting. She opened the door. "Can I help you?" A man she recognized as Owen Fletcher, who ran the general store, stepped forward. "Mrs. Ashford, we want to learn about your heating system, about how you survived when the rest of us barely did. Mr. Breckenridge told us you'd be willing to teach," added a woman Lorelei knew vaguely as Sarah Hendricks, "that you and he are working together now." Lorelei looked at the gathered faces, saw desperation there, and fear, and something else, something that looked like respect. "I can teach you," she said, "but you need to understand this isn't magic. It's work, hard work. Building these systems requires precision, patience, a willingness to trust principles that go against everything you think you know about staying warm." "We're ready," Owen said. "After this winter, we're ready to try anything." "Not anything," Lorelei corrected gently. "This specific thing, based on science, on the thermal properties of stone and earth. Are you ready to learn science?" She saw some of the men shift uncomfortably. Science was not something most of them had much use for. Science was for academics, for men like Caleb, who had time to think about rocks while other men did real work. But winter had taught them that real work was not always the same as right work. "Yes," Owen said, "we're ready." And so Lorelei began to teach. She started with the fundamentals, gathered her students in the cave, let them feel the warmth that had no visible source, showed them the thermal mass bench, explained in simple terms how heat moved, how it could be captured, how it could be stored. She used Caleb's journals, but she translated his academic language into words a farmer or a shopkeeper could understand. She drew diagrams in the dirt outside the cave. She built small models using clay and stones. She made them touch hot rocks and cold rocks and feel the difference. made them understand through their hands what their minds might not grasp through equations alone. Tad helped. At 8 years old, he had absorbed more of his father's knowledge than most adults ever would. He could explain thermal conductivity in terms of how fast a metal spoon got hot in a fire compared to a wooden spoon. Could demonstrate convection by showing how smoke rose, but steam from boiling water behaved differently. Even Goldie contributed. At 5, she could not explain the science, but she could show the result. Could play barefoot on the warm floor. Could sleep without shivering. Could be the living proof that the system worked. Silas Breckenridge was there too. Not as a teacher, as a student. He sat in the back and listened while Lorelei explained concepts he should have understood years ago. Listened while she patiently answered the same questions multiple times. Listened while men who had once come to him for all matters of building now hung on every word this widow spoke. It was humbling, but Silas had learned something valuable from his near-death experience with his son. Humility was not weakness. It was the foundation of wisdom. You could not learn if you thought you already knew. Could not grow if you believed you had already arrived. After a week of theory, Lorelei moved to practice. Who wants to be first? She asked her students. Who wants to build a thermal mass heater in their own home? The group looked at each other. Building such a thing seemed impossible, too complex, too different from anything they had ever attempted. Finally, Widow Marlowe stepped forward. I'll do it. Everyone turned to look at the old woman. She was 70 if she was a day, bent with age, her hands gnarled by arthritis. She lived alone in a cabin even smaller than Lorelei's had been. Mrs. Marlowe, Lorelei said gently, this is heavy work. Stone and clay, mixing mortar, lifting. I survived 2 husbands and 40 winters in this God's forsaken country. Prudence interrupted. I think I can manage some rocks and mud. Besides, I'm tired of being cold. And I'm too old to wait for someone else to fix my problems. Lorelei looked at the old woman and saw something of herself. The same refusal to be defeated. The same determination to survive not just today, but tomorrow and all the tomorrows after. All right, Lorelei said. We'll build yours first. Over the next 2 weeks, Lorelei led the construction of Widow Marlowe's thermal mass heater. She designed it specifically for the small cabin, a compact version of what she had built in the cave, more efficient with space, easier to maintain for someone with limited mobility. The whole town helped. Silas donated materials. Tobias fabricated the iron components. The men did the heavy lifting. The women mixed mortar and carried water and kept everyone fed. The children ran messages and fetched tools and learned by watching. And Lorelei directed it all. She stood in Prudence's tiny cabin and told Silas Breckenridge, master builder, for 30 years exactly where to place each stone. Told him when his measurements were off. Corrected his technique when he tried to revert to his old methods. And Silas, to his credit, listened. Learned. Did as she instructed without complaint or wounded pride. When the heater was complete, when the first fire was lit and the thermal mass began to warm, Prudence Marlowe sat on the bench and cried. Not from pain, from relief, from the bone-deep knowledge that she would never be cold again. This is a miracle, she said. It's science, Lorelei corrected. But she was smiling. Science and hard work. It's still a miracle, just one we built ourselves. That night, after everyone had gone home after Tad and Goldie were asleep, Lorelei sat alone in her cave and allowed herself to feel something she had not felt in a very long time. Pride. Not pride in what Caleb had left her. Pride in what she had become. She had started this winter as a frightened widow with no skills and no prospects. A woman the town pitied. A woman everyone expected to fail. Now she was teaching men twice her age how to heat their homes, was directing construction projects, was being listened to, respected, sought out for her expertise. She pulled out her journal, the one she had been keeping since Caleb's death, the record of her transformation. She turned to a fresh page and wrote, "I have become someone I do not recognize, someone stronger than I knew I could be. Caleb left me knowledge, but I turned that knowledge into action. I built the cave. I survived the winter. I saved our children. And now I am saving others. This is not his legacy anymore. This is mine. I miss him. I will always miss him. But I am learning that grief does not have to be the end of growth. That loss can be the beginning of becoming. I am Lorelei Ashford, and I am more than a widow, more than a mother. I am a builder, a teacher, a woman who knows how to make stone remember fire. And that is enough." She closed the journal, looked around her cave. The warm stone walls, the gently radiating bench, the space that had saved them. Tomorrow she would teach again, would help another family build their own salvation, would spread the knowledge that had kept her alive. But tonight she would simply sit in the warmth and be proud of the woman she had become. The construction of thermal mass heaters spread through Frost Hollow Ridge like a benevolent contagion. By the end of May, 8 families had completed systems. By the end of June, 17. By the time summer reached its peak in August, nearly every home in the town had either built a new heater or was in the process of doing so. The old Iron King stoves sat cold and abandoned, relics of a method that had failed. Some families kept them as secondary heating sources. Most sold them for scrap metal. Tobias melted them down and used the iron to create components for the new systems. It was a revolution. Quiet, but total. A complete transformation of how the town understood warmth and shelter and survival. And at the center of it all was Lorelei. She worked from dawn until dark most days, teaching, consulting, problem solving. Each home was different. Each family had different needs. She learned to adapt the basic principles to fit different spaces, to work within different budgets, to accommodate different levels of skill. She was not working alone. Silas had become her partner in truth. He brought his knowledge of construction, his understanding of materials and load-bearing and structural integrity. She brought the thermal science. Together they created systems that were both effective and beautiful. Silas's son Jasper was there, often learning alongside his father. The boy had recovered fully from his brush with death during the blizzard. But the experience had changed him, made him serious, thoughtful. He watched everything Lorelei did with intense focus, asked questions that showed a mind grasping for deeper understanding. One afternoon in July, Jasper approached Lorelei while she was sketching a design for a particularly challenging installation. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, "can I ask you something?" "Of course, Jasper." "My father says you're smarter than he is about this kind of heating." Lorelei looked up from her work. "Your father is generous in his assessment." "But is it true?" She considered the question, not the surface of it, the deeper implication. What this boy was really asking. "I know things your father doesn't," she said carefully. "And your father knows things I don't. The question isn't who is smarter. The question is who is willing to learn. And father is willing now. Yes, that's what makes him wise. Not that he knows everything, but that he knows he doesn't know everything." Jasper nodded slowly. "I want to be like that. Like you and father. I want to learn things that other people don't know yet." "Then study," Lorelei said. "Read. Ask questions. Don't be afraid to be wrong. Being wrong is how you learn what's right. My father was wrong about you." "Yes. And it almost killed me." Lorelei set down her pencil, gave the boy her full attention. "Yes. But he learned. And now he's helping people. So maybe being wrong isn't the worst thing. Maybe never admitting you're wrong is the worst thing." "That," Lorelei said softly, "is exactly right." As summer deepened, Lorelei found herself with an unexpected visitor. Reverend Amos Whitfield appeared at the cave one evening, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. "Mrs. Ashford," he said, "might I have a word?" "Of course, Reverend. Please come in." The old minister entered the cave, slowly looking around with the expression of a man entering foreign territory. He had been one of the last holdouts in the town, had preached that reliance on new methods showed a lack of faith in God's provision, had counseled his congregation to trust in prayer and traditional wisdom. But even Reverend Whitfield could not argue with results. His own church had been brutally cold all winter. Several of his elderly parishioners had nearly died, and he had watched with growing discomfort as the families who adopted Lorelei's methods thrived. "I came to apologize," he said without preamble. "I called your methods ungodly. Said you were trusting in human wisdom instead of divine providence. I was wrong." Lorelei said nothing. Let him continue. "I've been thinking," the Reverend went on, "about the parable of the talents. About how God gives us gifts and expects us to use them. Your husband had the gift of knowledge. You have the gift of taking that knowledge and making it useful. That's not ungodly. That's stewardship." "Thank you, Reverend. I want to learn, want to install one of these systems in the church, so that next winter my congregation doesn't suffer. Will you teach an old fool who should have known better?" Lorelei smiled. "I'll teach anyone willing to learn. Age and previous foolishness are not disqualifying factors." The Reverend laughed, a sound of relief. "Then I'm your student." "Good. We'll start tomorrow." After he left, Tad, who had been listening from his corner, said, "Everyone is coming around Mama. Not everyone, but enough." "Why did it take so long? You proved it worked months ago." "Because people don't like to change, especially when changing means admitting they were wrong. It takes courage to learn something new. More courage than most people realize." "Did it take courage for you to build the cave?" Lorelei thought about those desperate days in the fall. The bleeding hands, the doubt, the fear. Yes, more courage than I knew I had. But you did it anyway. I had to. For you and Goldie. That's what made me brave. Not that I wasn't afraid, but that I loved you more than I feared failure. Tad came and hugged her. Papa would be proud of you. I hope so, sweetheart. I hope so. August brought an unexpected discovery. Lorelei was organizing Caleb's journals, preparing to lend some of them to families who wanted to understand the deeper science behind what they were building. She had read through all 7 volumes multiple times, knew their contents almost by heart. But as she leafed through the final journal, the leather binding caught on something. She felt a thickness that should not be there. She examined it more carefully. The back cover had a pocket. She had known that. Had found the map there. But beneath the pocket, between the leather and the backing board, there was something else. A hidden space. A folded paper sealed with wax. Her hands shook as she carefully peeled back the leather. The wax cracked. The paper unfolded. It was a letter. In Caleb's hand. Addressed not to her, but to whoever reads this after I am gone. She read to the reader, "If you are reading this, then my thermal mass heating system has proven successful. Someone, likely my wife Lorelei, has built it, has used it, has survived a winter that would have killed them otherwise. I want you to know something important. I did not invent this system. The Earth has been using it since the beginning of time. Mountains store summer heat and release it slowly. Caves maintain constant temperature. Hot springs bring warmth from deep places to the surface. I simply observed, learned, copied what the Earth already knew. But observation is not enough. Theory is not enough. Someone had to have the courage to build, to test, to trust that the mathematics were correct, even when common sense said they were wrong. If you are reading this, that someone was probably Lorelei. I married her because she was brave, because she saw things others missed, because she could take my scattered thoughts and make them coherent, my wild theories and make them practical. I knew I might not survive to build this system myself. The work I do is dangerous. The mountains do not forgive carelessness. But I also knew that if I left Lorelei the knowledge, she would find a way, would build what needed building, would save herself and our children, and knowing her heart would then teach others to do the same. This is not my legacy. This is hers. I gave her a map. She walked the road. I gave her equations. She made them real. I gave her theory. She created salvation. If you are learning this system from her, know that you are learning from someone extraordinary, someone who took grief and turned it into purpose, who took fear and turned it into action, who took the knowledge of a dead man and gave it life. Respect her. Listen to her. Trust her. And if you are Lorelei reading this, my love, you did it. You survived. You built. You taught. You became everything I always knew you could be. You do not need me anymore. You never really did. But I am grateful I got to know you, got to love you, got to leave you something worth having. Live well. Teach well. Love our children. And remember, the earth does not forget the sun. And I will never forget you. Yours across whatever distance separates us, Caleb Ashford. Lorelei read the letter 3 times. Then she sat on the bench that she had built with bleeding hands and cried. But these were not tears of grief. Not anymore. These were tears of recognition, of being seen, of having been trusted with something precious and having proven worthy of that trust. Caleb had known, had believed in her even when she did not believe in herself, had left her not just knowledge but faith. Faith that she would rise to the challenge, that she would become who she needed to become. And she had. She folded the letter carefully, placed it in her own journal, not to hide it, but to keep it safe, to read when she needed reminding that she was not just surviving her husband's death. She was honoring his life by living fully in her own. That evening she gathered Tad and Goldie, showed them the letter, read it to them in a voice that only shook slightly. When she finished, Goldie said, "Papa knew you were special." "Yes, sweet girl, he did." Tad was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Are you going to show this to the others, to the people you're teaching?" Lorelei considered. "Should I?" "Yes, because they need to know that Papa trusted you. And if he trusted you, they should too." "But it's more than that," Lorelei said. "The letter says this isn't his legacy, it's mine. That means I own it. The success, the teaching, the future. Not because he gave it to me, but because I earned it." "So you are special," Goldie insisted. Lorelei pulled her daughter into her lap. "No, baby. I'm not special. I'm just someone who had to become strong because the alternative was dying. And that's a choice anyone can make. That's what I need people to understand. Not that I'm special, but that they can do hard things too. If they have to. If they're brave enough." She looked at her children, 8 and 5, old enough to have survived the unsurvivable, young enough to still believe their mother could do anything. "I love you both more than breath," she said. "And I promise you this, I will never stop learning, never stop growing, never stop becoming more than I was yesterday. Because that's what your father taught me. Not in his journals, but in how he lived. Always curious, always learning, always reaching for understanding." "We'll be like that too," Tad promised. "I know you will." The years that followed were years of growth. By the winter of 1889, every home in Frost Hollow Ridge had a thermal mass heating system. The town had become something of a curiosity. Word spread to other communities. People came from as far as Denver to see the widow who had revolutionized home heating, to learn the principles, to take the knowledge back to their own towns. Lorelei taught them all, sometimes in groups, sometimes one-on-one. She never turned anyone away who genuinely wanted to learn. Silas Breckenridge had transformed his lumber operation into something new. Breckenridge Ashford Thermal Systems, the sign read. He handled the construction. She handled the design and the teaching. Together they made a formidable team. The partnership was strictly business, professional, but there was also friendship there. Born of mutual respect and the shared understanding that they had both been transformed by the same winter. He from certain expert to humble student. She from frightened widow to confident teacher. People talked, of course, whispered that surely there was more than business between them. A man and a woman working so closely together. Both unmarried now, after all. Lorelei ignored the whispers. She had learned something valuable over the past years. Other people's opinions of her life were not her concern. She would live as she chose, work as she chose, teach as she chose. And if the town wanted to gossip, they could do so around the thermal mass heaters she had taught them to build. At least they would be warm while they speculated. Tad grew tall and serious. At 11, he was already showing signs of his father's analytical mind. He read constantly, asked questions that required Lorelei to think deeply to answer, helped with the more complex mathematical aspects of design. Goldie at 8 was different. Where Tad was serious, she was joyful. Where he analyzed, she intuited. She could look at a space and know without calculation where the thermal mass should go, how the heat would flow, what would work. She has your practical sense, Silas told Lorelei one day. Tad has Caleb's theory, but Goldie has your ability to see what will actually work. Lorelei looked at her daughter, who was helping a family mix mortar for their heater singing while she worked, and felt a fierce pride. She's going to be formidable. Like her mother, Silas said. In the spring of 1890, a delegation arrived from the territorial capital. 3 men in fine suits, clearly uncomfortable with the mud and the mountains and the simple life of Frost Hollow Ridge. They asked to meet with the person responsible for the thermal heating innovation that had saved so many lives during the Great Blizzard of '88. Lorelei received them in her cave. Let them see where it had all begun. Let them feel the warmth of stone that remembered summer. Mrs. Ashford, the lead delegate, said, "We've come to offer you a position. The territorial government wants to establish a training program. Teach this system throughout Colorado. Save lives before the next bad winter. We can offer you a salary, resources, official sanction." Lorelei listened, considered, then said, "No." The delegates blinked. "I'm sorry. I said no. I appreciate the offer, but I teach here, in Frost Hollow Ridge, for free, to anyone who wants to learn. I won't turn that into a government program that requires forms and fees and bureaucracy. But think of how many more people you could reach. I am thinking of them, and I'm thinking that the moment this becomes official, becomes regulated, it stops being about teaching and starts being about control. I won't let that happen. Mrs. Ashford, with respect, you're just one woman. You can't teach the whole territory by yourself." "No," Lorelei agreed. "But I can teach people who will teach others, who will teach others. Knowledge spreads like fire if you let it, but only if you don't try to own it, only if you give it away freely." The delegates left frustrated, but Lorelei felt no regret. She had made the right choice, the only choice that honored what Caleb had left her. Knowledge meant to be shared, not sold. Wisdom meant to spread, not be controlled. That evening, Widow Marlowe came to visit. The old woman moved slowly now, her arthritis worsening with each year, but her mind was still sharp. "Heard you turn down the government men," Prudence said, settling onto the warm bench with a sigh of contentment. "I did." "Good. They'd have ruined it. Made it about them instead of about the people who need it. That's what I thought. Prudence was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You know what you've done, girl? You've given this town something more valuable than warm houses. You've given us dignity. Shown us we don't need to rely on expensive stoves and outside experts. That we can build our own salvation if we're willing to learn. That's worth more than any government program. I just taught what Caleb discovered." "No." Prudence's voice was firm. "You did more than that. Caleb had ideas. You made them real. You survived when we all thought you'd die. You thrived when we thought you'd fail. You taught when you could have lorded it over us. That's not just teaching science. That's teaching how to be human." Lorelei felt her eyes sting. "Thank you, Prudence." "Don't thank me, thank yourself. You earned this, every bit of it." By the winter of 1891, nearly 3 years after the great blizzard, Frost Hollow Ridge looked like a different town. Not physically. The buildings were the same. The streets were still mud in spring and dust in summer. But the people had changed. There was a confidence now. A knowledge that winter, no matter how fierce, could be survived. Could even be comfortable. The thermal mass heaters worked exactly as Lorelei had promised they would. Families used a fraction of the wood they once needed. Homes stayed warm with small fires twice a day. Children played barefoot on heated floors while snow piled high outside. And when problems arose, when a system needed adjustment or repair, people knew who to ask. Not because she was the expert who knew everything, but because she was the teacher who would help them figure it out. One December evening, 3 years almost to the day after Caleb's death, Lorelei sat in her cave with an unexpected group of visitors. Silas was there with Jasper, now 15 and apprenticing as both a builder and a thermal systems designer. Widow Marlowe moving slowly but still sharp as winter wind. Reverend Whitfield, who had become one of her most enthusiastic students. And a dozen others. Families she had taught. People whose lives she had changed. "We wanted to mark the anniversary," Silas said. 3 years since the blizzard. Since you showed us a better way." "I didn't show you," Lorelei corrected gently. "I offered. You chose to learn. That's the difference." Still, Reverend Whitfield said, "We wanted to thank you. Officially. As a community." He pulled out a wooden plaque. Simple but well made. It read, "Lorelei Ashford, teacher, builder, survivor. She gave us warmth and dignity. Frost Hollow Ridge, 1888 to 1891. Lorelei took the plaque with shaking hands. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything," Prudence said. "Just know that you changed this town. Changed all of us. Made us better. Stronger. More willing to learn and grow. That's legacy, girl. Real legacy." After everyone had left, after Tad and Goldie were asleep, Lorelei hung the plaque on the cave wall. Next to it, she hung the letter Caleb had written. The one that said this was her legacy, not his. She stood back and looked at both pieces of wood. Both testimonies to transformation. One from a man who had believed in her before she believed in herself. One from a community that had learned to trust her wisdom. She pulled out her journal. The pages were nearly full now. 3 years of entries. 3 years of growth documented in her own hand. She turned to a fresh page and wrote, "3 years ago, tonight I was certain we would die. The blizzard was coming and I had built a cave and a strange stove based on a dead man's theories and my own desperate hope. Tonight I sit in that same cave, warm and alive, and surrounded by the evidence of what choosing courage can create. I am not the woman I was 3 years ago. That woman was frightened and small and certain she was not enough. I am Lorelei Ashford, teacher, builder, mother, friend, leader. I have taught 60 families how to build thermal mass heaters. I have shown a town how to survive winter without fear. I have turned my husband's theoretical knowledge into practical salvation. But more than that, I have learned who I am when everything is stripped away except choice. When there is no one to rely on but myself. No one to save me but me. I am enough. I have always been enough. I just had to become desperate enough to discover it. Caleb left me a map, but I walked the road. He left me equations, but I built the solution. He left me love and faith in the conviction that I could do hard things. He was right. I can. I have. And I will continue to do hard things. We'll continue to learn and grow and teach and build. Not because I am extraordinary, but because I chose to be. That is the real lesson. Not how to heat a home, but how to save yourself. How to look at impossible circumstances and refuse to surrender. How to take knowledge and turn it into action. How to become more than you thought you could be. I am Lorelei Ashford, and I am just beginning. She closed the journal, looked around the cave one final time. The thermal mass bench radiated its patient warmth. The stone walls held steady. The space that had started as a desperate gamble had become home, had become a classroom, had become the place where she discovered her own strength. Tomorrow she would teach again, would help another family build their own warmth, would spread the knowledge that had saved her. But tonight she would simply sit in the cave she had built with bleeding hands and a breaking heart, would sit in the warmth of her own making, would allow herself to feel pride and peace and the deep satisfaction of having survived the unsurvivable. Outside, snow began to fall, the first snow of a new winter. But Lorelei did not worry. She knew how to be warm, knew how to survive, knew that winter, no matter how harsh, was just another season, just another challenge to be met with science and courage and the patient wisdom of stone that remembers fire. She placed her hand on the bench, felt the warmth beneath her palm, the heat stored in clay and stone, the earth remembering the sun. And Lorelei Ashford, widow turned teacher woman who had saved herself and then taught others to do the same, smiled. The earth remembered the sun, and she would make sure no one ever forgot the lesson.